Winning was easy, young man. Governing's harder. That's the sentence President George Washington spurs at Alexander Hamilton in the musical that takes his name. It's a great phrase and shows how easier it is to deal with a big, straightforward issue, in that case the War of Independence, than concerting several small and sometimes divergent matters. Well, every time I'm proud of myself because of my brilliant plot idea, Washington pops out by my side to remind me that the more complex work is yet ahead. After struggling with the writing of dozens of adventures, I established 5 steps I take to turn a simple plot idea into a remarkable adventure. 1. Conceive relatable victims. 2. Create credible villains. 3. Establish strong motivations. 4. Invest in the plot development. And 5. Design the adventure outline. You might think it's strange to start with victims, or even question whether every adventure should have victims at all. The truth is, there's a lot of iteration among those steps. I usually start from whichever one is easier for me to start, and when I think I'm ready, I move to the next easiest one. Then, when I develop one of those steps, I often come up with new ideas that make me go back to steps I had already worked on to add or adjust information. So, those 5 steps certainly don't have a chronological order. But should every adventure have victims? After all, sometimes adventures don't even have a villain, instead antagonists, NPCs that are not necessarily evil, but they are struggling for power or divergent goals. Even so, power struggles, such as a war, a revolution, or a political intrigue, very commonly create collateral damage for people that may have either high stakes or little to do with the established conflict. Regardless of a villainous threat or unintentional harm, it is in the moment that players are in touch with NPCs that can share the danger, the fear, or the pain that they are suffering that an emotional connection is established with the adventure. That's why I like to have relatable victims as a step 1. It forces me to remember that whatever the quest the players are facing, it will get much deeper when it ceases to be an abstract issue and becomes a first-person tale of how things have derailed to someone with whom the players can empathize. So yes, I try very hard that every adventure of mine has victims. The plot I had imagined for a recent adventure was the investigation of the violent murder of the 3 Ortega siblings, merchants that the citizens of Arabelle much liked. The plot itself already established for me step 1, relatable victims. I thought of 2 plot twists to surprise my players and allow them to interact with the victims throughout the adventure. First, the older brother had become a revenant at the moment of his death, taken by the desire for revenge against the murderers of his family. Unbeknownst to him, his younger sister had survived the murder attempt. She was a natural-born werewolf, and the stress of the situation made her transform for the first time and escape. She was now roaming the city streets astray at night, taken by her wolf self. That would allow players not only to interact with her during the adventure, but also offer them a redemptive resolution for the adventure. They were not only hunting down the murderers, but they still had a chance to save one of the victims. The she-wolf subplot, by the way, was something I had not initially devised for the adventure, and instead something that I had taken from one of the player characters' backstories, which allowed me to enrich my story. I talked about the advantages of working with multiple plots and connecting character backstories to the adventure in another video you can watch by clicking on the screen. Somewhere here. But the truth is, when I created this plot idea, I had no idea who would be the murderer. So it was time to start the hard work and move to step 2, create credible villains. As it was a mystery adventure, I wanted the killer to be someone unsuspected, someone close to the victim, someone who would not have committed a capital crime in normal circumstances but would be resentful enough to perpetrate a violent betrayal if he felt threatened. The killer should be someone that the Ortegas trusted dearly. I decided that my villain would be the trade master of the Ortega merchant house, someone who had been working with the family for 20 years. I liked that choice, a three-dimensional villain who felt himself pushed into violence rather than someone evil by nature. Plus, his proximity to the Ortega family would allow my players to have a social encounter to get to know him, unaware they were interacting with the actual villain of the story. But I felt that that character wouldn't do it alone. He would hire the services of a necromancer to do the dirty work, which was another plot point that came out of one of my players' backstories. There, two villains then. Next, I needed to work on step 3 and establish solid motivations for the crime. What would push a quiet trade master to that sort of brutality? First and foremost, a massive dose of resentment. I decided that the Ortega siblings had inherited their merchant house. Despite owning the majority of the business, they were very distant from the daily operations. The trade master, despite of owning a small share of the merchant house, was the one doing most of the work for 2 decades, feeling himself unrecognized by the family and wronged by the circumstances. But his resentment wouldn't be enough to outpour into violence. I needed a push, something that would make him feel threatened enough to change his grudge into rage. So I decided to add a tragic element to the older Ortega brother, the Revenant. He had lost himself in drinking, gambling, and cheap pleasures. He was greatly indebted and told his trade master that he would bleed his family merchant house to pay his debts. There, all those years working day and night to make this business succeed, earning but a fraction of what he felt he deserved, and all that for a spoiled brat to ruin his future? That's the strong motivation that I needed. My time invested in working well steps 1 to 3, victims, villains, and motivations, would pay off, making step 4, plot development, easy for me. Most pieces were already laid down, and I could easily articulate how the events unfolded. The older Ortega brother was in debt, and his choices put his family's merchant house at risk. His resentful trade master owned part of the business and felt his future threatened by that. That pushed him to violence, and he hired a necromancer to make the kill. Not everything went as planned, however. The younger sister, unbeknownst to the villains, was a natural-born werewolf, and shape-shifted at the night of the crime and ran astray. The older brother, consumed by revenge, turned into a revenant at the moment of his death and sought the necromancer and the trade master for retribution. That's where my players would jump in, right in the middle of that mess. This takes us to our last step. I had already taken my cool plot idea and worked it out into an exciting story, but step 5, designing the adventure outline, is vital to taking this intriguing story and land it as an exciting adventure. This step is everything that the players will actually interact with, and through that, uncover the adventure story. Even more important than that, I need to lay out the pieces that will help lead my players to that story resolution and ensure that all that is immersive and fun for them. There's an additional plot point that I had created for this story that would help me to build an exciting adventure outline: the Diaries of Rosario Ortega, the middle sister of the assassinated family. She kept 3 volumes of her journals that would reveal essential story points, such as the secret lycanthropy of her younger sister and her older brother's fall from grace. As they held somber family secrets, Rosario carefully hid her diary's volumes in different locations. My adventure outline started with an encounter that would present my players with the violent murder of the Ortega siblings and task them with its investigation. They would also have access to Rosario's will, revealing the diary's existence to them. That first encounter would unlock a few subsequent encounters where the players could start their investigation. They could visit the Ortega Manor, where the family was killed, they could talk to former manor servants, and they could talk to the city priest, who had cast a Speak with Dead spell to collect the victim's testimony. It also wouldn't take long for the players to hear the rumors that a werewolf was running loose in town. Once they visited the Ortega Manor, they would find strange claw marks that hinted the werewolf was somehow related to that crime. They would also confront undead shadows in the manor, tasked by the necromancer to search for Rosario's journal. That would also be the first clue of the necromancer's involvement with the killing. There, they would also find the first volume of Rosario's journals. The former servants would mention the older Ortega brothers' downfall and the family's relationship with their trade master, leading them to that encounter. As for the high priest, some odd reports would be collected from the dead victims, leading the players to the family mausoleum. There, they would meet the revenant, who was already on the hunt for the necromancer who had killed his family. Somewhere along the way, they should also start their hunt for the werewolf. As you can see, having the idea is easy. Developing a remarkable adventure is harder. But with practice, I learned that those were the 5 steps I should keep in mind to accomplish that. Relatable victims, credible villains, strong motivations, plot development, and adventure outline. I understood that the best step to start from is the one that seems easier to me, and that I should feel free to go back and forth between all of them. Once I go through those 5 steps, I get confident that my plot is ready to be transformed into immersive encounters that involve my players in an exciting story as they overcome the challenges I have prepared for them.